Hello, everyone. Today we'll be talking about our final project, uh, the coffee shop named Drip and Sip. Part one is about business plan. The coffee shop is located near Temple University that provides quality service and generates a profit of $200,000 per year. The expected size is one full-time manager, one part-time manager, four full-time staff working 5 days per week, four part-time staff working 2 days per week, handling about 200 to 300 orders per day. The business runs 7 days per week from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. All orders are picked up at the counter, but there are seats for self-serve customers. To save manpower, each customer pays a quarter when picking up order to bring to the seat and will be refunded when returning the empty tray. All items are available all day. Orders can be taken at store or over the phone with no delivery or over the apps with optional delivery. Items so include decaf, dark roast, light roast, Colombian, espressos, cappuccinos, coffee bean, and smoothies.
Okay, so part two of this project was developing the ER diagram and schema that goes along with it, which was kind of complicated in a sense in order to think of all the things that needed to go into it. So the main goal that we were looking at when we developed this was basically thinking about what type of data do we really need to document as, let's just say, a coffee shop. So really, this could be a lot more complicated. It could have a lot more layers to it, or it could even be a little bit more simple, but we thought what we included was at least necessary at a lower level to keep a business like this running. So obviously not all data was documented, like for example all customers, and if I show you the diagram here, now this is just a diagram, not the actual schema, but it's a little bit easier to follow, so I can use this as an example. So we do have the way to document customer purchases via customer ID. However, this would be more use in, let's say, like a loyalty program. So if a customer was using their loyalty card in some way to identify themselves, then yes, we would have it documented, what they purchased. And if you did have such a program, you would probably want to document how much money they're spending in order to give them rewards and points and so on and so forth. Even if this wasn't immediately used for that purpose, at least having the infrastructure in place is important. So that's kind of where we started off. Like we were just thinking from actually making a purchase, what is the immediate things that need to be documented. And with that, we have receipts, balances, and all that. However, customer ID, as you notice, it is not mandatory. It does not have the mandatory little red asterisk there because not every customer is going to necessarily be a loyalty member, and a lot of them might just pay cash or they might pay with a card, but they're not necessarily going to have that recorded, and really there's no point. It's a waste of space in the database as well to just keep that information. But for the business side of it, though, you do want to have all of your orders documented for tax purposes to know how much money you're making and so on and so forth. So we did kind of have a receipt of that order, the balance due, and then what it was paid with, credit card, cash, or whatever, for just good record keeping purposes. So obviously that's kind of like the first goal of the database for really any business. You would obviously want to document those transactions. Now, if you looked at that though, you would notice that basically we kind of try to focus mostly on item and supply inventory. Orders were documented too, as I just mentioned, but not as much detail, just more or less what was the order, and that's it. But if you look at the bottom, you have a lot more information in regards to the supplies and the inventory. Now there's a bit of a difference between them. Supplies means things that are used just to keep the business running. So let's say perhaps cleaning supplies or something to keep the the area clean. Things you're going to use up in day-to-day operations. The item inventory is the actual items you plan on selling. So that could be coffee beans or whatever. That's things you're actually planning on selling. So we wanted to differentiate that because they're kind of have two different purposes there. Essentially, your customer orders are going to take away things out of your item inventory versus the supply inventory is going to be a whole separate thing. And we also wanted documentation from the suppliers as well that just for order purposes, like where are these supplies coming from or items, how much are we paying for them as a business, and so on and so forth. And all that information is here, and that's kind of where it gets complicated. So we kind of have a connection from item to the store itself, and then we have like a relational entity here called store item inventory, just to keep tabs on what's actually in that store, right? Or do we need to buy more of a certain item, and so on and so forth. And the same thing with the supplies and so on and so forth. So just to kind of keep tabs on what we have, what we need, and how much we spent. Another thing we did include that I didn't mention was a time card and just like an employee information table. Pretty basic: employee ID, first name, last name, phone number, any information you would need on them, their salary, and then their time cards. So basically when they're punching in and out, and at what store, as employees might go from store to store. So that information was stored there as well. But really, the majority of this table is really for just documenting inventory and items. The reason why we didn't go any more in depth on the what was I going to say, the payment methods and the like store and credit card information. Generally, a small business like this, you're probably going to use something like Square or some third-party system to keep tabs of your credit card purchases. So that's not something you're necessarily going to do in-house anyway, unless you become a larger business. So we didn't feel that was really necessary. We just more or less keeping tabs on how much money is coming in and out is really we felt that was necessary. But the main thing that is necessary is keeping tabs of what you have. Obviously, you don't necessarily need a database for that. You could just go and look at your stockroom and see what's in there. But if you're going to use a database, that would mainly be the focus, that and employee information as well. There are some third-party systems that do take care of HR things such as employee information and whatnot. But if you're already building the database to do this, you might as well include that information as well and get two birds with one stone. And then finally, here's that relational model that is built from this diagram. It's a little bit more complicated, so I didn't really use that because I feel this is easy to follow just by looking at it. But this has pretty much everything in it here. I try to spread it out as much as I can so you can follow it, but it is all there. I think this is a little bit neater to look at though. But that covers our overall schema and ER diagram for part 2.
Part 3 is about database performance. The data volume is mostly associated with orders, estimated at 200 to 300 per day, and new customers estimated at 30 to 50 per day, as each table would be used about 3 times for each order: receive order, prepare order, checkout. The frequency of use of tables would be about 600 to 900 times per day. Orders and customers are sequential indexed. For orders, it is numbered from low to high. For customers, it is by an alphabetical order. Database as a service is a backup and recovery method of choice due to the nature of this small business. For security, only employees are authorized to access and modify the database with username and password. Only managers can assign and edit employee login information. No work-related activities are allowed in the work computers, and up-to-date antivirus software must be installed in each computer.
Hello, my name is Anthony Bowie, and I am a member of the Drip and Sip Coffee Group. Um, right now, I'll be giving an overview of part 4 for our group project. Part 4, the information that you see here is the tables and data. So for our project, we came up with 14 different tables that we felt was important in order to make this database run smooth, and to be able to provide different information that we felt was needed. Some of the tables that you see here are the customer table, employee information, item supplier cost, the order item quantity. You have schedule, store item inventory, uh, order transactions. That's the order underscore T. Supplier supplies, time cards, supplier supply cost. And if you look over to the right over here, you'll see the queries that were ran in order to execute and input those tables. We have a create table customer, and there you'll see the customer ID, which says not null. First name, last name, the email address, as well as the address, which you see here. We don't necessarily need. You see that the customer ID is the primary key. And if you look, you'll see all that information for the other tables that we needed to create. And it's just a simple create table tab, create table execution. Now here, this is the important stuff. What good is a table if you don't have any data to insert in it? So here, if you look closely, you'll see that we ran very simple insert statements in order to insert the data into these tables. So for the first one over here, we have insert into supplier, and that information is you have your supplier ID, your supplier name, the phone number, the address, as well as the email address. And in order to do so, this is the information that we used. We have the supplier ID for the first one is a 1. We have the wholesale coffee, which is the supplier's name. We have a phone number that we will use to get in contact with this particular supplier. And for address, we simply are using the state. You see that this one here, the first one is from California, as well as the supplier email, which is important if you needed to reach out via email to track information and to get information to figure out what's going on with the supply and what the store needs. If you can look at this table and you see all the other data that's input, you'll see supplies. Given that we are a coffee shop, it's very important to keep track of our supplies. And we have different things that we offer, and the things that you don't really think about, which is important to keep track of, is general supplies that we use, like, and even things like straws. I guess if you're a coffee shop, you're thinking, oh, all you need is coffee cups, but it's so much more that we need to keep track of. Bags, sugar, and flour. And we go on here and we're able to see the ID number for that information. So when we need to put it into the system, we know what we need to order. We also have a table that tracks what the store has available and what we have on, what store has what supplies, so we know what to do in order to get more supplies to keep that store up and running. So here's the information for part 4. Like I said, we have the tables, 14 tables, and we have the information that was put into those tables. Supplies, suppliers, employee information, schedule. We have our schedule over here on the far right, and we have the insert statement for that. And right here you see 501. That is the store number, so we know what store that is correlated with.
All right, and part 5, user creation. So you could almost say this is the most important part of this whole project, because without a user, what use would any of this be, really, if you can't access it? So there's 3 main users that we were focusing on for this. The first one is a clerk, or basically any low-level employee that would be working in the coffee shop. So this person should be able to view the data, but really they should not be able to modify the data. So if they need to view inventory to see if there's a certain item that's available for sale because a customer wants it, they should have access to that, as well as anything else. Basically, they should be able to build a select statement. Obviously, they're not going to do that. The program would on the on their end, but regardless, that's ultimately what would happen. They should not be able to modify the data, however, because really, just kind of compartmentalizing the software, they don't need that permission, so that was not granted them. The managers, they should be able to view and update data. So if they just receive an order, they should be able to update the item inventory as well as any of the supply inventory. They should have access to that. And then the highest level user would obviously be the developer, more or less the permissions that we have making this. And they should be able to not only view and edit the data and be able to override all the other users, they should also be able to create objects as well. So, this database is not necessarily going to be finalized as of this point. You could further develop this later on as your business grows. You might want to add more objects. You might want to track more data. And obviously, you need to have a user that has those permissions to do that. So that's another person that we added to the list here. And really, there's only 3 names, but ultimately, you would probably want to duplicate that with the same permissions if you had, let's say, multiple developers or multiple clerks and so on and so forth. All right, and this is the code. This is the SQL script here, and you can tell it's basically copy and pasted 3 times, just with a few different things changed. So the first thing we had to do, obviously, is we had to create the user. So that was the first step. So create clerk, manager, developer. Again, if you needed to create multiple managers, multiple clerks, you can just do that. But we just started with 1 for now. And the next thing you have to do is you have to grant them privileges to actually connect to the database. So that was the next step that we took. And then from there, we were able to add their permissions. So the clerk, being that they are only going to more or less view the data and not edit it, we only granted them select privileges. So if they want to essentially build a select statement to see, hey, what what is the inventory on this item or whatever, how much is there, the quantity, they could go ahead and do that. And obviously there would be an interface that would do that for them. They wouldn't necessarily be directly typing that in, but you understand the point there. So they're basically just viewing the data, and that's it. Now for the manager as well as the developer, they are granted all permissions on that. So that's selecting as well as editing that data for the same parts of the database that the clerk is. All right, so they have access to the same tables and whatnot, but they can edit as well as view the data. And then the last part here, which is unique to the developer, is the ability to create tables, procedures, and views. So a manager shouldn't be doing that. Yes, they should be able to manipulate the data, but they don't really have the know-how of how to actually create a database. They're just a manager of a coffee shop, so they don't need that privilege. But any kind of developer would. So those permissions have been granted to the developer on the bottom, and that's it. So it's actually wasn't much code to write, because really you just kind of copy this, paste it 3 times, and change select to all for the last 2 parts here, and then change the names, and it's more or less the same thing. But that's kind of the breakdown of how we did it. And if you were to add more users in the future, you would use this template here. All right, and that is part 5.
Hi, I'm David Fetty. Welcome to part 6 of our Drip and Sip Coffee database plans. In this section, we will discuss our data warehousing plans and a star schema. Goals of our data warehousing are to maintain historical business data as well as key metrics and a data structure optimized for mass retrieval, which will give our business analysts an efficient tool to provide key insights into business operations and performance. Areas we feel star charts will be useful include sales, where we'll be maintaining that data by customer, store, time, and item in order to maximize profitability and analyze item sales and margins. Wholesale purchases by supplier, item, and time for our supply chain management operations, And finally, employee information for optimizing payroll and employee retention. This is our star chart for sales. You can see the sales fact table in the middle, as well as the dimension tables for customer, item, date, and store. Here's a sample of our insert statements. As you can see, it's completed with complex insert and select statements, pulling data from our initial database into the star schema and the optimized structure for our analysts. Finally, we'll discuss our extract, transform, and load plans. We will be doing a weekly data refreshment to ensure close and active monitoring of our business performance while also not having too much downtime. We have selected the first Independence Data Mart method with a data mart for finance, a data mart for marketing, and a data mart for operations. This concludes part 6 of the Drip and Sip Coffee database plans. Thank you for listening.